Hey guys, welcome back, I'm Jay. In this episode, we're going to look at the DNS, Domain Name System. DNS is a global network of domain servers that help IP-enabled devices, such as computers and smartphones, easily communicate with web resources. DNS is a web directory that stores the mapping information of domain names and IP addresses. DNS routes internet traffic by translating human-friendly domains into machine-friendly IP addresses. For instance, you can map Cloudemy.tv to an IPv4 address such as 10.0.0.1. DNS helps users easily access web resources using simple domains. Imagine if the internet doesn't use domain names. When you visit Amazon, Google, and Cloudemy, you need to memorize all the IP addresses. Domain names are much easier to remember and more convenient to use. A domain name is an identification string that helps find internet resources such as websites, services, and networks. You can make your website available on the internet by registering a domain name. A top-level domain or TLD is the last string of a domain name separated by a dot delimiter. Every domain name ends with a TLD label. For example, .tv is the TLD in Cloudemy.tv. Other popular TLDs include .com, .net, .org, and .gov. TLDs are the highest level domain names of the internet, and form the DNS Root Zone. There are two types of top-level domains, generic TLD and country code TLD. TLDs like .com, .net, and .org are generic TLDs. These TLDs normally carry specific purposes, or serve certain types of organizations. For example, non-profit organizations normally use .org for their websites. Government bodies and state entities usually use the .gov TLD. Country code TLDs are also known as geographic TLDs. They are associated with countries or cities, such as .nz, .cn, .co and .us. Below the top-level domains in the domain name hierarchy, are the second-level domains or SLDs. SLDs are the names directly to the left of TLDs. For instance, .nz is the TLD of Cloudemy.co.nz domain, and .co is the SLD. Next are third-level domains, which are written immediately to the left of an SLD. There can be fourth and fifth level domains with virtually no limitation. These domains are also called lower-level domains. A subdomain is a label prefixed to a registered domain name. For instance, 3w.cloudemy.tv is a subdomain of Cloudemy.tv domain apex. You can also create subdomains of a subdomain by creating a hosted zone for the higher-level subdomain, and adding records for lower-level subdomains. If you want to create a website or application, you can start by registering a domain name of your website. Domain registry is a company that owns the right to sell domains of specific TLDs. For example, VeriSign is the registry that owns the right to sell .com domains. Domain registry defines the rules for registering a domain, such as residency requirements for a geographic TLD. It also maintains the authoritative database for all of the domain names that have the same TLD. The authoritative database contains information such as whois information, domain contacts and name servers for each domain. Domain Registrar is a company that is accredited by Internet Corporation for assigned names and numbers or ICANN, to process domain registrations for specific TLDs. For example, Amazon Registrar, GoDaddy and Namecheap are accredited domain registrars. Domain Reseller is a company that resells domain names for registrars. They are usually third-party companies that provide web hosting and email services. DNS Root Zone is the top-level DNS zone in the hierarchical DNS namespace of the Internet. The root zone is overseen by the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN. ICANN delegates the management of the root zone to a subsidiary, acting as the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority or IANA. DNS Root Zone is served by 13 root server clusters, which are authoritative for queries to TLDs of the Internet. Every name resolution either starts with a query to a root server, or uses information that was once obtained from a root server. A root name server is a name server for the root zone of the DNS of the Internet. It directly answers requests for records in the root zone, and answers other requests by returning a list of the authoritative name servers, for the appropriate TLDs. Due to limits in the DNS definition and certain protocols, resulting in a maximum of 13 root name server addresses, that can be accommodated in responses of DNS queries. These addresses are associated with logical subdomains, range from A to M, prefixed to the root servers.net domain. Root server clusters are networks of hundreds of servers, at over 130 locations around the world. Root servers are essential to the function of the Internet, such as the World Wide Web and email systems. They are potential points of failures for the entire Internet, therefore, there are multiple root servers distributed globally. Root Zone database contains the information of top-level domains. You can find the Root Zone database at the iana.org/domain/root URL. You can also find all root servers and locations around the world at rootservers.org website. DNS resolution is the process of a resolver translating IP addresses to domain names. DNS resolver is often managed by an Internet Service Provider or ISP. It acts as an intermediary between user requests and DNS name servers. When you open a browser and enter a domain name, the query goes first to a DNS resolver. The resolver talks to DNS name servers to get the IP address for the domain name. A DNS resolver is known as a recursive name server, because it sends requests to a sequence of authoritative DNS name servers, until it gets the IP address. Authoritative name server is a name server that returns some DNS information to the DNS resolver. This information can be the subsequent name servers, for a specific top-level or second-level domain, or the IP address. Here's how DNS resolution works. When a user requests Cloudemy.tv website, the request is first routed to a DNS resolver. The DNS resolver forwards the request for Cloudemy.tv to a DNS root name server. The root name server checks its database, and returns a list of authoritative name servers of .tv TLD to the DNS resolver. The DNS resolver forwards the request for Cloudemy.tv to one of the name servers of .tv domain. The requested name server sends back a list of name servers, which store the hosted zone for Cloudemy.tv domain. They are normally the name servers that provide the DNS service for the domain. The DNS resolver forwards the request to one of the name servers of Cloudemy.tv. The name server checks the hosted zone for Cloudemy.tv, finds the corresponding IP address and returns it to the DNS resolver. The DNS resolver returns the IP address for Cloudemy.tv back to the user's web browser. The web browser then sends the request to the Cloudemy web server using the IP address. Finally, the web server returns a web page to the web browser. The whole DNS resolving process happens in just a few milliseconds. The DNS resolver normally stores the domain records in the cache. When the resolver receives requests for an existing domain before its time to live expires, the resolver returns the cached value, instead of submitting a new request to the name server. A hosted zone is a container of DNS records that define how to route traffic for a domain or subdomain. A DNS record is an object in a hosted zone, which contains the routing information, such as the IP address. Start of Authority or SOA record is a special record, which specifies authoritative info of a DNS zone, including the primary name server, domain administrator, domain serial number, and timers relating to refreshing the zone. Name server record or NS record indicates which server is the authoritative server for the domain. It specifies which server contains the actual DNS records. A record is also called the address record. It's used to map the host names to an IPv4 address. Quad A record is the record for an IPv6 address. Canonical name or CNAME record is the record that maps a subdomain to another domain. It's commonly used to map 3W to a domain apex, which is the top node of a domain. For example, you can map 3w.cloudemy.tv to cloudemy.tv by creating a CNAME record. But you cannot directly map the domain apex with CNAME. Alias record is a virtual record provided by some DNS providers, such as Amazon Route 53. It's similar to CNAME record, except it lets you directly map any domain, including domain apex to another domain. MX record or mail exchange record specifies the mail server that is responsible for accepting email messages on behalf of a domain. Time to live or TTL is the time in seconds, which specifies how long DNS resolvers cache the DNS record before submitting another DNS query to the name server. The shorter TTL results in faster DNS changes can take effect. In this episode, we've learned DNS, the domain name system. Domain name system or DNS routes internet traffic by translating domains into IP addresses. Top-level domain or TLD is the last part of a domain name, such as .com and .net. Second-level domain or SLD is the string directly to the left of a TLD. Domain registry is a company that owns the right to sell domains of specific TLDs. Domain registrar is a company that is accredited by ICANN to process domain registrations for specific TLDs. DNS Root Zone is the top-level DNS zone in the hierarchical DNS namespace. Root Zone database contains the details of top-level domains. DNS Root Zone is served by 13 root server clusters. Root servers directly answer requests for records in the root zone, and answer other requests by returning a list of the authoritative name servers, for the appropriate TLDs. There are 13 root server addresses with logical prefixes, range from A to M, prefixed to the root servers.net domain. Root server clusters are networks of hundreds of servers, at over 130 locations around the world. DNS resolution is the process of a resolver translating IP addresses to domain names. DNS resolver is often managed by an internet service provider, and acts as an intermediary between user requests and name servers. Authoritative name server is a name server that returns some DNS information to the DNS resolver. This information can be the subsequent name servers, for a specific top-level or second-level domain, or the IP address. A hosted zone is a container of DNS records that define how to route traffic for a domain or subdomain. A DNS record is an object in a hosted zone, which contains the routing information, such as the IP address. The SOA record specifies the authoritative information of a DNS zone, including the primary name server and domain administrator. The NS record indicates which server is the authoritative server for a given domain. The A record is used to map the host name to an IPv4 address, and the quad A record is for IPv6 address. The CNAME record is used to map a subdomain to another domain. However, you cannot use CNAME to map a domain apex to another domain. The alias record is a virtual record that can map any domain, including domain apex to another domain. The MX record specifies the mail server that is responsible for accepting email messages on behalf of a domain. TTL is the time in seconds, which specifies how long DNS resolvers cache the DNS record before submitting another DNS query. Okay, that's all for DNS. Thanks for watching and see you in the next episode.
Hope you've enjoyed watching this episode. If you liked the video, please help us and hit the like button. If you want to watch more tutorials, please subscribe to the Cloudemy TV channel. Make sure to turn on the notification and stay tuned. At Cloudemy, we're passionate about cloud and AI technology. Please share your feedback and thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to watch. Happy watching and happy learning.